Now, we know that soil is variable and dynamic, and yet many agronomic decisions are still made based on models and annual soil tests. But what if we could easily get this soil information in the field in real time? Similar technology is being used in the biomedical space, and ChrysaLabs is now adapting it for agronomy.
Soil is full of energy, it's full of life, and basically it's around the same pattern as if you scan a human body to some extent, right? So how can we transfer and apply the knowledge that were already explored in the medical sphere and apply all these learning into the ag space?
ChrysaLabs founder Sam Fournier says they can provide real-time data on things like nitrogen and carbon content in the soil at an affordable price. This could be a really valuable tool for agronomists and farmers.
When you go back and you sample, then you realize that perhaps there's way less nitrogen than you envision in the soil, or at the opposite, there's already enough nitrogen for what the plant needs at that given time.
The company's also getting a lot of interest on the carbon side, an area that's in desperate need of easy-to-use science-based measurements.
People sense opportunity, and when they sense opportunity, they're trying to be a bit more rogue in the way they're doing things, right? So how can we make sure that what we are doing is really science-based?
The impact of real-time soil analysis on today's Future of Agriculture podcast. Hey, fellow ag nerd. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Future of Agriculture. My name is Tim Hamrich, and every week you and I get to hear from the founders, farmers, innovators, and investors, the people shaping the future of the ag industry. Today's episode features Sam Fournier, CEO and co-founder of ChrysaLabs. Now, I've heard Sam pronounce it both ChrysaLabs and ChrysaLabs, but I'm going to go with ChrysaLabs to, I think, more reflect what is the hybrid between the American English pronunciation and the French Canadian pronunciation, because Sam and the team are based in Montreal. I had the chance to briefly meet Sam at World AgriTech in San Francisco this past March. Thank you very much to Sachi Desai and the team at Bayer for the intro there. And when I heard about what they're doing, I immediately asked if he'd be willing to come on the show for a podcast interview. Now, it's been months here. He's been busy. I've been busy, but we finally made it work. This idea of providing real-time soil information on nutrients, things that we usually have to wait on a lab for and get back, but making it easier and put in the hands of agronomists and farmers is something that I know is a concept that's been tried before, and to my knowledge has failed. The tech has failed. The companies have failed. But ChrysaLabs has been at this since 2018 now and have established a bit of a track record reliably providing this information, which is something that I think could be super exciting for the future of agriculture. So, wanted to bring Sam on to ask more about how the tech works, how affordable this could be for farmers and agronomists, what impact this could have on management decisions, and where Sam wants to take the tech and the company from here. For some background information, prior to founding ChrysaLabs in 2018, Sam held strategic positions in the development of smart cities implementation projects, electric recreational vehicles manufacturing, and electric vehicle sustainable power plant solutions. So you'll notice a theme there. His entire career was in clean tech before ag tech. He holds a bachelor's in political science from Sherbrooke University and an MBA from Laval University, and is driven by his vision for a more sustainable agriculture ecosystem. I'm going to drop you into the conversation here where Sam is describing what lured him from clean tech into ag tech and what ultimately led to the founding of ChrysaLabs.
When I was focused on clean tech, I always been very focused on the IP development and scaling IP from the research center directly to the industry, right? So that was part of my work, been working with very early stage technology and companies, but also with different research centers across the globe. And so kind of in doing that, met some researchers in Asia that have been developing a biotech specifically applied to agriculture. But the benefit of that was related to less fertilizer, being more resilient in terms of water. So it had a huge impact in terms of climate as well. So that what basically caught our attention. And we've decided that that could be a standalone company. So met with my partner at the time that is now also at Chrysa with us, and decided to work specifically on that project. And then until we realized basically that the biggest problem that we had was not necessarily scaling that biotech, but looking at soil, which we thought was, at least for us and our ambition, a bigger problem that we wanted to solve.
And as you kind of did some research into this idea of like, how can we, digitize, soil data and make it real time, readily available for agronomists and farmers. What made you think that this was possible? Because a lot of people have been sending soil to a lab for a long time. What made you think like actually the tech could actually work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So basically, the technology that we're using are what we call optical design sensors. So it's about spectroscopy and other form of optics and physics that we're using. And these technology have been used in different industries for years, right? So if you look, for example, at medical treatment or like analysis at the hospital and everything, these technologies have been around for decades. So it's basically a way to capture the information, and lights are reacting very different ways to different molecules and different protein. And perhaps one thing that we need to mention is two of my co-founders are PhD in biomedical engineering, right? So they've been looking at these technology for a long time in a different setup, right? So when we started discussing about soil, their first interaction, soil is a living ecosystem. Soil is full of energy, is full of life. And basically, it's around the same pattern as if you scan a human body to some extent, right? So how can we transfer and apply the knowledge that were already explored in the medical sphere and apply basically all these learning into the ag space? So we've, as opposed, it was not just no such thing as just taking something that already existed and put it there, but we kind of learn a lot from these situations and develop a very specific technology and proprietary IP on how to transfer these kind of large technology in ag setup, really very focused on capturing soil health, soil quality, carbon sequestration, and so on. So that was really kind of where it all begins.
And talk more about the technology as it sits today. What is the offering for somebody who's just hearing about ChrysaLabs for the first time? What is the offering, and what's the technology just from a high level?
Yeah. So again, we've developed a suite of optical design sensors, basically to look at soil quality with the biggest objective to improve land potential and decrease the carbon footprint of agriculture. So the suite of technology that we have are different sensors that all have different aspect and different value proposition. We're working on nutrient quantification in soil. We're working on carbon quantification in soil. We're working on kind of soil health and soil quality more broadly. And basically, it's a sensor that capture information from the soil. So it's an in situ types of sensing. We need to be in proximity with the soil, so in the soil, very close to it. And then basically, what we capture at that point are spectrum from the soil directly. And we apply machine learning on a cloud computing engine that we've developed. So it's basically a large database that sits in the cloud. And we shift those spectrum that we collect into nutrient concentration or soil properties. And then we push back the information into a user app or through an API into the preferred platform of our partners. So it's basically a way to digitize soil in a very effective way and in a very accurate way as well.
And is it a probe?
Yeah. So there's nowadays different ways to look at our technology, but the first product that we launched back, when we started the company in 2017, that was actually a probe. And still to date, we still have one of our product that is a probe that we insert in the soil, and within seconds we collect the needed information.
And what are the other ways other than probing? I'm just curious.
Nowadays we've been taking a lot about automation because there's a burden of collecting the samples where you need to send someone in the field, collect the information. And with the information that we know now in the industry where the labor shortage, it's not the sexiest job on earth to just kind of walk an entire field and collect data points, right? So we're thinking about automation and how can we basically, as the equipment moves in field, how can we collect some information? So those are the things that we've been exploring and kind of in terms of different ways to collect information that could be more efficient and more profitable for different operations.
You use the words kind of, we're working to digitize like nutrients and carbon and that sort of thing. Give us a sense of what you're able to do today that before ChrysaLabs, the average agronomist was not able to do.
Yeah, I guess one of the good example is how the process was before us and how for our clients. So let's say a typical agronomist in the Midwest for a corn farm, they would they would collect samples manually. They would put this in a bucket. They would mix the soil. Then they would bag that specific soil. Then they would come back to the office. They would write the specific label on that specific bag. They would send this by courier to a wet lab. Would take a few days, perhaps weeks before they can get the results. And with these results, then they would prescribe what type of fertilizer they needed to buy, what is the quantity, and where exactly they should apply this, right? With our solution, people can directly come in field, collect the points, and within seconds, they have all the data that they need to support the agronomist. That said, one of the major use cases that we're seeing is really for diagnosis. So some nutrients are more sensitive from a time perspective. So nitrogen is a real good example. We've been doing a lot of work on nitrogen sensing because it is one that tends to fluctuate over time and is one of the most crucial also for plant growth, right? So you want to know if, for example, you have nitrogen, then you have a large rain event, you're not exactly sure if you still have nitrogen in your soil, right? So it's important for you to be able to go back very quickly to understand how much nitrogen you still have in your soil to be able to reapply. So it's not only seeing us as like us vs the lab, it's us also sometimes complementing what lab is able to provide in terms of diagnosis and how fast we can provide the information to just inform and react on the reality on the farm day. And then we have another side of our business, which has been growing very fast, which is in regard more to sustainability, Scope 2 reduction, carbon sequestration. So in that specific market, we serve a project developer for carbon. We serve CPG company, food companies for Scope 2 reduction, carbon traders, different MRV companies that are in need for such data that we collect. So I'd say basically notwithstanding the type of clients that we are serving, most of them come to us just for the ease of use of the system and how fast they can get access to the data. It's also, they can control a little bit more the narrative. We sort of empower them in getting their data. Right now they're relying on a third party to provide the data. As of us, they can really control the narrative and kind of bring the information when they need it at the speed that they need it to inform their clients. So there's a shift there that seems to be pretty powerful as well. But yeah, we're also trying to position this as much as possible with our clients. And this is normally when the client comes to us when there's always something in regards to land potential and sustainability, right? So how can we maximize the profitability of a specific farm? How can we reduce, perhaps maximize the ROI of how the operation is run? How can we maximize the amount of carbon we're sequestering in our soil? So that's kind of normally where we are seeing the biggest traction in what we're doing right now.
And I understand the appeal to like the real-time data when it comes to nutrient management. It's like, I got to apply this now. I need to know how much is out there right now. When it comes to the sustainability metrics, why is that so important? You kind of would think that they would just have their, as long as they get a measurement, they're not probably going to change anything in real time would be my guess. But why is that important to them?
Yeah, it is a good question, Tim. And it comes from the incentive supply chain at that point. So right now, you're right? If I know today that I have this much carbon in my soil, I won't change my practice tomorrow, right? Specifically, if it's in the fall, like what can I do? But the thing is, then let's say you're in a Scope 3 program where you want to reduce the carbon intensity of corn, for example, for biofuel or ethanol or something. There are certain rewards that are attached to a specific practice, right? So you need to report on them to get a specific payment. So right now, the way the sampling and like the lab analysis are done, this has a lot of time within the operation and sometimes can derail a little bit the project from the way they can report and make the payment. And to make this very appealing to growers, you need to make sure that you're kind of respecting a specific sequence in terms of timeline that makes it interesting for all the stakeholders that are involved. So I'd say time is interesting, but also from a cost perspective, there's some incentives, of course, of being able to work with a digitized platform as opposed as a brick and mortar with this cost structure is a little bit different at that point.
Okay, yeah, I could see that. I could see some of the challenges with attaching the soil data to the product moving through the supply chain and timing kind of being of the essence through that. That makes sense to me. Now, is the business model where an agronomist would pay for access to the platform, or what does that look like?
Yeah, we run this as a subscription model where the way to look at this is that we're getting paid for people to get access to data. They're generating data with our system and they're paying to get access to data. So that's the easiest way, notwithstanding the models that we have, or if it's for nutrients, soil quality, soil fertility, carbon, it's always the same pattern that we're using where, people pay to get access to data.
And when it comes to the nutrient side of things, well, I mean, both on the nutrition and on the carbon side, you don't need to list them all, but give us a sense of the types of things that you're measuring exactly.
Yeah, I'd say the two large ones that we're seeing a lot of, that we're doing a lot of work right now we're doing a lot of work on carbon, organic matter, bulk density, and those metrics that are a little bit more linked to what we could call sustainability projects in the US. And then for nutrients, we've been doing a lot of work for nitrogen management specifically. So that's been a very big one for us. And then as part of the offering, we also work on phosphorus, potassium, CEC, pH, and list of minor nutrients. But the one where there's a lot of focus and a lot of kind of work being done, specifically in the US, as we do a fair share of our sales in the US, but also in South America and here in Canada. Yeah, I'd say that carbon and nitrogen has been kind of a big focus for us.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And has there been anything where, because for the first time, agronomists and farmers are getting, and I guess in your case, CPG companies and others are getting this data in real time, any big ahas where they're like, oh, we kind of thought the data was telling us one thing, but it's actually kind of leading us in a different direction because of the new way we're getting this data? I'm just curious on that.
Yeah, this is why, for example, nitrogen is a very good one for that, right? One of the common practices that people would apply perhaps a certain amount in the fall, and then they would only reapply nitrogen based on yield objectives. So they would not really care what's in the soil to reapply nitrogen, right? So it's about what's my yield objective, what's the update that I'm seeing in different phase of the season, and then they would apply according to that. But when you're able to, let's say there's a rain event, or just you just want to test your soil to understand clearly what's going on right now before an application, very easy to understand that what was supposed to be the established mindset of, okay, I'm going to fractionate basically my nitrogen over tree time exactly this way, right? Boom, boom, boom. It's not a say that this is exactly how plant will capture it or soil will be able to take it, right? So when you go back and you sample, then you realize that perhaps there's way less nitrogen than you envision in the soil, or at the opposite, there's already enough nitrogen for what the plant need at that given time. So there's no need to reapply perhaps your last citrus application that was planned in, let's say, in the coming 2 days or something. So being able to capture these information specifically for nitrogen that is pretty volatile has been pretty important. And we've been doing quite some work also in California and high value crops where there's fertigation systems, right? So they are able to apply and reapply nitrogen in different timing in the season, and that's been proven to be pretty powerful.
Awesome. Do you see the company as, at least for chemical properties, is it mostly, do you see the company as enabling an agronomist to be their own lab?
I'm not sure. I don't know if we enable them to be their own lab, because that's, some of our clients are still working with labs in different ways for different needs. But the way I like to look about this is that we're bringing a lot of autonomy in their decision-making process, right? So we are empowering them with soil data that they can be a better version of themselves with that type of data to better support their client and being more profitable and being more sustainable. So, one of the things, there's always this view on agriculture that, you should maximize always how much you're producing, right? And what we realized talking with most of the agronomists that we have as client is that it's more about optimizing, right? So how do you optimize the current resources that you have to maximize return on investment, but not necessarily the yield on every single acre? So it's a fine line, but for that and to achieve that specifically, sometimes you need to go out a little bit about perhaps the grandpa playbook, and you need to look a little bit more with data. How exactly do I optimize the practices that I can do in my farm, or the input that I have and the resources to really maximize the return on investment? So that's really one of the KPI that we're looking at. And I guess our tool and our solutions really support agronomists in working towards that direction.
Yeah, I think that's what I would see as, the biggest challenge that you all, from at least from a marketing standpoint, have to overcome would be helping the customer understand why the status quo isn't good enough. Like, kind of the attitude of like, well, I've always kind of done this and, I'm still here, so must be good enough, right? Versus like, if you really try to optimize in a data-driven way, it's going to make a big difference on your operation. Do you run into that pushback a lot?
Yeah, of course. Agriculture is still a conservative market, right? We don't lie. I was in other market in the past, and it's not exactly the same way of operation. There's a little bit like it, and it's normal, right? Because it's a pretty sensitive industry. They're feeding the entire planet. So there's multiple reasons. And there's already a lot of risk with weather conditions and climate change. And so why would they take on top of that another tech risk if what they've been doing for years and decades have been proven to be pretty successful? So yes, we understand this. And if you're trying to change everything that they've been doing with something that is so transformative that they won't understand, perhaps not the greatest idea, right? So what we come up with is basically the type of information that they used to have, just packaged in a different way, right? We're just a better delivery of bringing information that they know for a fact is already valuable. So that's been pretty powerful for us, not trying to redo everything that was done, but they have access to information. They need this information. And we're just a better vehicle of providing the information for them. And we believe that to get the maximum value out of this, then we partner with some of our clients to build programs that make sense also and can achieve maximum value. And so that kind of linked to scope 3 reduction, for example, or everything that we're doing from a nitrogen management perspective. We're trying to go beyond only providing the data, because data for data there's a lot of data in the industry. So how can we leverage the data that we are basically providing and making sure that we build programs with our partners that are very sticky and make sense for farmers that they're serving?
Yeah, and the data that you all are collecting, I mean, you mentioned earlier in the conversation, having PhDs in biomedical engineering and kind of learning from that industry. Now, where my brain goes, and where I'm sure a lot of listeners' brain goes, like, oh yeah, because in the medical field, at least in the U.S., like there's a lot of money in that, right? They can spend big dollars on expensive equipment because they're going to get the ROI from that, via the healthcare that they're offering. How do you make it affordable for an agronomist, an independent agronomist out there trying to run their business with a handful of clients that they service? How do you make it economical is a short question, I guess.
Yeah, and that's a good one, Tim. And that was the biggest challenge that we had, right, when we started, because again, the technology, as you just described, was used in different market in the past, and we needed to apply this specifically for agriculture. But not only was it in need to be designed for a purpose of looking at soil, but also in the greater scheme of the industry in general, where the ecosystem and economics are very different than from the medical industry, right? So basically for us, that was a big challenge, and we've worked very hard in the first 2 years of the company to really make the tool affordable. So nowadays, it's something that agronomists can have in their pickup truck, and it's not a multi-million-dollar equipment, but it's really something that they can afford and can basically work with. But that was one of the first. How do you translate this and making it work in soil and in agriculture? So that was the first one. And then how do you make this financially viable for people using it, knowing that sometimes these technology are very, very costly. So again, spectroscopy and optical design sensing has been around for years. So there's multiple ways to adapt these technology for them to make sense in agriculture. And we're not the only one using these optical design sensor in agriculture. When you think about some cameras that you're putting on top of tractors, when you're kind of having different types of equipment that goes within rows to look at fruit quality or even yield in different fashions. So there's a lot of different sensors and optical design sensors that are making their way into agriculture. And it's a pretty nice way to inform, because human eye have some limitation that optical design sensors can really provide in terms of accuracy and speed of action.
Sure. Well, one thing that I like from what I understand is that you all are really keeping the agronomist at the center of this process. The relationship they already have with farmers, the fact that they know the local context. If I'm an agronomist listening, what's it look like for me to get a return on investment of getting involved? Maybe I see opportunities both in carbon and on the nutrient management side. I'm going to pay ChrysaLabs, obviously, for access to the platform, whatever hardware comes with that. Is it going to basically just integrate into the same workflow I have, or am I going to have to change the way I approach servicing my customers based on using this?
So for most of our clients, it's a pretty standard replacement. They can basically start using us without changing the way that they've been doing things in the past. Just that they'll basically create a faster environment in which they're consuming the data and how they can also work with the data. No, you're right. We position on purpose the agronomist kind of centerpiece of the relationship. We understand how important the relationship between the agronomists and the farmers are, and how significant and how influential they are in the operation of their farmers. So the objective for us is basically to supplement their knowledge and their power in that specific relationship, and just making sure that they can be as good as they need to be to create maximum return for the wallet, but also for the planet. So that's kind of really where we're seeing things. And even as we move forward and like think about what can be the future of sensing for agriculture, there's still a lot of knowledge that is captured from agronomists. And there's no such thing as they have the exact recommendation and this is standard for the entire county, right? This will depend on soil types, on how much money they want to invest in a specific field. And like there's so many things and so many variables that this knowledge basically comes from the agronomists. And yeah, we're only looking to supercharge that with information that comes quicker and wait for them to be more influential in that relationship.
And for you all to adapt that to a farm setting, is the harder problem the hardware problem or on the software side of actually having the right software to process this information into something usable?
For us, it was really, it's kind of the step in the middle. So the hardware was one thing, the software was one thing, but the piece in the middle is building this database, right? Because when you're trying to predict soil with an optical design sensor, then you need a reference database to know exactly what you're predicting. We've been using AI way before it was cool. Not nowadays, it seems like it's really, really cool. But like when we started in 2017, that was the only way to basically convert a spectrum from the soil that basically tells us like just wavelengths. And then we needed to understand exactly what was the amount of nutrients and what was kind of soil quality of that specific spectrum. So we built a very large database of information all across North America, South America, to basically inform our system when they're seeing spectrum, what exactly they're seeing. So that was the toughest part, right? Where a lot of investment there, a lot of data were collected just for the system to be able to work, right? So that was kind of one of the biggest breakthrough, I guess, also that was needed for a tool like this to happen, because there's no such thing as you take an optical design sensor and off the gate, you have results that are right on target.
On the carbon side, it would seem to me like for nitrogen, if I'm a farmer or an agronomist, I can see the nitrogen there, quantify it because of your technology. And I know that it's there because I put it there, or that it's used up because either the plant used it or it left the soil for whatever reason. Carbon to me seems a little bit different. Why it's there, how to build it, in what form it is. It seems a little bit more nuanced on carbon. Am I thinking about that correctly? And if so, how do you sort of account for that when you're helping people draw conclusions from quantifying the carbon in their soil?
Yeah. So you're right? We're not looking at carbon to apply carbon, right? So like when we're looking at, for example, nitrogen, we're interested in understanding the amount of nitrogen in soil compared to our plan for a season for corn, for example, and how much that corn would need at different stages and making sure we can achieve a full potential. When we're looking at carbon, we're not saying, hey, this is that much carbon, why don't we reapply carbon for this season? That's not the way we look at this. Carbon is basically created with photosynthesis that exists where we capture CO2, release the oxygen, and kind of capture the carbon in soil. So it's more for us on how practices are influencing the amount of carbon that is there. And that's kind of the job that needs to be done, more than, okay, with the carbon that you have now, we'll specifically tell you what to do to have more, right? So it's, okay, you've changed your practices. It's more an audit basically of, hey, is what you're doing functioning basically in terms of sequestering more carbon? And that kind of, this is the role that we're playing as an MRV, which stands for measurement, reporting, verification. So that's kind of where the job needs to be done for carbon, is really about, okay, we need to understand what's in it now. And you can compare this to the planet you've been building, and are you successful? Are you not? What type of modification can I do then to increase carbon a different way? But yeah, so that's kind of the way to think about this.
Yeah. And on the carbon side, there's been a lot of different models that people are testing out there, different types of models for offsets, different types of models for insets. How do you see that playing out? And I'm thinking about for the farmer and agronomist audience that are listening, how do you see that playing out where they can position themselves to maximize the value of their farming practices?
I believe there's a kind of the winning solution is probably a mix of different existing solutions. So I don't believe there is like one single winner that will capture, at least from a carbon perspective, that will capture 100% of the market, because like what they are doing alone is the best thing. So at the end of the day, specifically for carbon, it goes back to how much money, if you're doing this on an inset and offset market, how much money are you receiving compared to how much money are you investing to get there, right? So if you're looking at this purely from a financial perspective, there's some incentives that happens, but then you need to look at how much money was invested to get to the answers that you needed. And this opens also another door about like the other benefits of soil that perhaps should not be linked to like the incentive financially, but like let's park this one for now. But looking at this from a financial perspective, modeling are doing a pretty nice job because they can bring a lot of information very at a cheaper cost, because you can do this from modeling practices, farmer information, satellite imagery. Then you have like the proximal sensing tool where you need to get in field, but you can scan at a very high level. There's also some remote sensing imagery where you can try to predict in various places how much carbon in it, specifically in soil. And then there's what we are doing where it's directly in situ, where we can capture very accurately where carbon is at one place. So in order to get kind of the maximum value out of this, there's a mix of technology that can exist together on broader programs. So this is why when we work with different clients on the CPG side, on the carbon program side, they would typically use one or more of these technologies. So they would use ways to stratify their field to optimize the sampling location. They would do also modeling in between years, in between sampling events. So there's different ways and different mechanisms that influence their decision on this. Without going too deep into it, there's financial reason why it would make sense also to want to have information in between sampling years, because then you can perhaps emit some early credits. So there's kind of different reason out there, but the winning solution out there is a mix of different solution. And for us, the only thing that we are super focused about, and like has always been and will always be, is the high integrity of the report that we're doing, right? So we don't want to let the kind of cheapness of some solution be in the way of the greatness of the results. So yes, of course, there's always you can always find a cheaper way to quantify something, right? So there's always a cheaper way, but we need to maintain the integrity and the value of the information that we're providing, because people are making claim basically on this. And we've seen this in the last 2 years. Nature-based solution and the large carbon industry, they've been receiving some pretty good punch in the face here just because of their reputation. Nature-based solutions are ecosystem. The way it was quantified was not done properly. They were not investing enough. So agriculture is in large potential for sequestration. There's a lot of opportunities there, but we need to take this seriously and really invest in making the claims and the quantification very robust, to making sure that the claims that are based on these data, will be lasting and are not kind of associated with some sort of a green fraud.
Yeah, well said. Absolutely. This whole carbon thing is still in the early days, but it's already eroding trust based on lack of real data. And I think the way you just articulated that was really well put. One thing, and you're in Canada, so you might have even more of a clear idea on this than those of us in the US is the regulation that is associated with this carbon sequestration, both looking at agriculture as a big contributor to carbon footprint, greenhouse gases, but also as a potential part of the solution. I think you all are seeing more of that in Canada than we are in the US, but I'm sure it's not going away anytime soon. Can you talk about that and how that impacts those of us thinking about the future of agriculture?
Yeah. And this is a good one. And I know the place on Earth where it's probably a little bit more advanced would probably be the EU, where they've been pretty strict in how they've been thinking about this. But perhaps an unpopular opinion here, but yeah, regulation will at some point will kick in, and it's probably a good thing somehow just to kind of structure the market a little bit more. Right now, it's every other week there's a company that comes in with new rules, and basically rules are vetted by just someone. And they have a specific body that will look at these rules. And if they're good enough, someone might pay for it. And at the end of the day, just this kind of all market auto-regulated just creates more and more and more. People are just getting more lost, basically, right? So they're losing the sense of what's true, what's not, what's good, what's bad. So regulation will come with a very specific structure to the market, right? And this will come with some very specific set of rules that we'll need to look at. Okay, so what can be considered as a ton of carbon? How do we need to look at this? What's good? What's bad? How can you do it, right? What's additionality? What's permanent? So there's a lot of different rules that would exist with specific regulation. And of course, there's some, we can talk about regulation on sequestering more carbon. We can talk about regulation on, perhaps the impact of nitrogen management. But no, the thing that I'm saying now is not even talking about these points that perhaps some people had good and bad opinion about, but really being able to properly structure the market to avoid like people getting lost and really bring confidence in the market. This at some point will need to happen, because if there's as many structure as there's carbon project out there, like no one's following the same rules. It's impossible to compare apple to apple. And this can get pretty rough on credibility of these programs.
Yeah. So you're kind of talking about creating a standard that at least gets everyone kind of speaking the same language at minimum.
Yeah, exactly. And people have been starting to talk about that for quite some time. And this is kind of the new era of carbon, what we're seeing right now. But we can go back on time and kind of look at different situations where people look to kind of start these carbon programs for mainly in the forestry, but also a little bit in agriculture, and always come back to the same, like people sense opportunity. And when they sense opportunity, they're trying to be a little bit more rogue in the way they're doing things, right? And when that happens, sometimes the biggest loser is the environment, right? So how can we make sure that what we are doing is really kind of science-based and really provide a real impact on what we're trying to achieve?
Very cool. Well, Sam, thank you for spending all this time. Before I let you go, though, anything we didn't get to that you wanted to make sure we either add or emphasize about what you're doing there at ChrysaLabs?
No, I guess, I'm so glad, Tim, you invited me to this podcast. It's truly a pleasure to be here today. And I guess, we would be happy to connect with anyone that is looking to, get more data, bring more sustainability in their farm, but also in their kind of greater network. We're just passionate about what we're doing, and looking forward to kind of making this business grow.
All right, well, that is going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much to Sam for being on the show. Go learn more about what they're doing at their website, which is just ChrysaLabs.com. It's ChrysaLabs, ChrysaLabs.com. Thanks again to Sam. I know he didn't share a whole lot of detail about how they're trying to automate the collection of this data. As I listen back through this, it's a bit of a missed opportunity on my part as a podcast host. I apologize. I should have pushed for more details on that, but maybe a follow-up conversation might be in order at some point to further discuss how we automate the collection of this data. It's certainly interesting, though, to think about the possibilities if we really can automate the data collection part of things, maybe like mounted on a piece of equipment. Could that actually lead to almost a see and spray type of concept with fertilizer application? I know a bit futuristic probably at this point, but certainly a cool concept to think about. Thank you again to Sam, and thank you especially to each and every one of you who continue to listen every week. I can't believe 8 years into this or whatever we are, we're still going strong. Really appreciate you tuning in every week. I do not take it lightly. I'll be back next week with another story of ag innovation.